There's a specific moment in relationships with avoidant people, a turning point that you typically don't recognize until much later when you're piecing together what went wrong. This is the day the avoidant person realizes they've fallen in love with you, the day their feelings cross the threshold from manageable affection into something deeper and more vulnerable. You might expect this realization to bring the avoidant person closer, to open them up, to create the breakthrough you've been hoping for. But what actually happens is the opposite and far more devastating. The day the avoidant person recognizes they love you is the day they begin planning their exit from the relationship. This counterintuitive response stems from the fundamental paradox of avoidant attachment. The more they care about someone, the more threatened they feel, and the more urgently they need to create distance or escape entirely. Love, for the avoidant person, is not the gateway to deeper intimacy, but rather the alarm bell signaling maximum danger. Their recognition of love activates every defense mechanism they've spent their lifetime developing, triggering an elaborate process of withdrawal and eventual abandonment that is specifically designed to protect them from the vulnerability that loving someone creates. Understanding this process, recognizing the signs that the avoidant person has crossed this threshold and begun their exit planning, is essential for anyone caught in relationship with avoidant individual. The behaviors that follow their recognition of love look confusing and contradictory from the outside. The person who seemed to be growing closer suddenly becomes distant. The relationship that seemed to be progressing suddenly stagnates or regresses. The avoidant person who appeared increasingly invested suddenly seems checked out. These shifts aren't random or caused by external circumstances. They're the systematic implementation of an exit strategy that began the moment the avoidant person's feelings became too real, too deep, too dangerous to their defended sense of self. The moment recognition hits and the panic that follows. The avoidant person's recognition that they love you rarely arrives as a gentle, welcome realization. It typically hits as a sudden, unwelcome awareness that triggers immediate psychological alarm. This recognition often occurs during a moment of genuine intimacy or connection, when their defenses are momentarily down and they're experiencing closeness without their usual filters. Perhaps you're laughing together over something mundane and they realize they feel deeply happy in your presence. Perhaps you've supported them through a difficulty and they recognize they depended on you and it felt good. Perhaps they catch themselves thinking about you constantly or planning their life with you in mind. Whatever the specific trigger, the realization arrives with force. I love this person, and this love makes me desperately vulnerable. This recognition is fundamentally different from how securely attached people experience realizing they're in love. For secure people, recognizing love brings joy, excitement, desire to deepen the connection and express the feelings. But for the avoidant person, recognizing love triggers panic that registers in their nervous system as genuine threat. Their heart rate increases, their breathing becomes shallow, they feel compressed and trapped. The physical sensations of panic accompany the psychological recognition, creating overwhelming experience that the avoidant person's system interprets as danger requiring immediate response. The panic stems from the avoidant person's core wound and the beliefs built around that wound. At some deep, often unconscious level, they believe that loving someone makes them vulnerable to devastating hurt. They learned, usually in early childhood, that depending on someone and caring about them deeply leads to abandonment, rejection, or disappointment. These early experiences created internal template. Love equals danger. Vulnerability equals pain. Depending on someone means giving them power to destroy you. The avoidant person has organized their entire adult life around never being in this vulnerable position again, and suddenly they find themselves exactly where they swore they'd never be. The avoidant person's immediate internal response to recognizing love is typically denial and minimization. They try to talk themselves out of what they're feeling. They tell themselves it's not really love, just strong affection or temporary infatuation. They remind themselves of your flaws or incompatibilities, trying to diminish their feelings by focusing on reasons the relationship shouldn't work. They might even convince themselves temporarily that they don't actually have these feelings, that they're making too much of simple fondness. This denial is first line of defense against the panic, an attempt to make the feelings less significant and therefore less threatening. But the feelings don't actually diminish through denial. The avoidant person continues noticing evidence that contradicts their attempts at minimization. They catch themselves missing you when you're apart. They realize they're happier when you're around. They notice they're thinking about future with you, despite their best efforts not to. These observations accumulate and eventually overwhelm the denial, forcing the avoidant person to acknowledge internally what they're trying to avoid. They're in love, genuinely and deeply, in ways that make them more vulnerable than they've been in years or possibly ever. This forced acknowledgement of their feelings triggers the second wave of panic, often more intense than the first. The avoidant person recognizes they cannot simply think or deny their way out of these feelings. Love has taken root despite their defenses, which means they're in genuine danger of being hurt. This recognition of their own vulnerability is intolerable to their nervous system. They cannot sit with it, cannot accept it, cannot allow themselves to remain in this exposed position. Their psychological survival instincts activate with singular goal. Eliminate the threat by eliminating the source of vulnerability, which means eliminating the relationship. The avoidant person at this stage experiences intense internal conflict that they typically cannot articulate or may not even consciously recognize. Part of them wants to move toward you, to express their feelings, to deepen the connection. This part recognizes that you make them happy, that the relationship has value, that loving and being loved is what they actually want underneath all their defenses. But another part, the defended part that has kept them safe through years of avoiding intimacy, is screaming that they need to run, that staying means risking catastrophic hurt, that the only way to protect themselves is to end the relationship before you have the chance to hurt them. This internal conflict is exhausting and creates cognitive dissonance the avoidant person cannot resolve while remaining in the relationship. Every moment with you reminds them of their feelings and their vulnerability. Every positive interaction deepens the feelings they're trying to escape. Every expression of care from you increases their dependence and therefore their danger. The avoidant person feels trapped between their desire to stay and their compulsion to flee, and this trap is so uncomfortable that it becomes intolerable remarkably quickly. The avoidant person's response to this intolerable discomfort is to begin planning their exit. This planning might be conscious and deliberate, or it might be unconscious strategy that emerges through their behavior without them explicitly recognizing they're implementing it. But whether conscious or not, the planning begins almost immediately after the recognition of love. The avoidant person needs to escape the vulnerability, and escape requires ending the relationship in ways that protect their ego and minimize their own pain, even if it maximizes yours. The immediate defensive strategies they deploy. The avoidant person's exit planning begins with deployment of immediate defensive strategies designed to create distance while maintaining plausible deniability about their intentions. These strategies serve dual purpose. They start the process of disconnection that will eventually lead to the relationship's end, and they protect the avoidant person from having to consciously acknowledge that they're sabotaging the relationship because they're afraid of their own feelings. The strategies allow them to create the distance they desperately need, while framing that distance as something other than fear-driven withdrawal. The first defensive strategy is emotional shutdown. The avoidant person who has been gradually opening up and sharing more of their internal world suddenly closes off again. They stop sharing their feelings, their struggles, their daily experiences. They return to surface-level conversation that reveals nothing of substance. They withdraw the vulnerability they had been tentatively offering, pulling back into the defended position where they feel safer. This shutdown happens quickly, often noticeably so, creating whiplash effect where you wonder what changed to make them suddenly so distant. This emotional shutdown is accompanied by rationalization that makes it seem justified. The avoidant person might claim they're stressed about work and need to focus their energy there. They might suggest they need more time to themselves to recharge. They might frame their withdrawal as healthy boundary setting rather than as defensive retreat. These explanations sound reasonable on the surface, which is precisely why they're effective. You accept the explanation and try to give them the space they claim to need, not recognizing that the space isn't about what they're claiming, but about their fear of the vulnerability their feelings create. The second defensive strategy involves the avoidant person suddenly becoming hypercritical of you and the relationship. After a period of increasing closeness and acceptance, they begin finding flaws and problems that weren't bothering them before. They focus on your imperfections in ways that seem disproportionate and unfair. They bring up incompatibilities that they previously dismissed or overlooked. They express doubts about whether the relationship makes sense or whether you're really right for each other. This criticism serves crucial function. It provides justification for the distance they need to create and eventually for the ending they're planning. The hypercritical stance also serves defensive purpose of diminishing their feelings. If they can convince themselves that you're not actually that great, that the relationship has significant problems, that you're not really right for them, then maybe their feelings weren't as deep as they feared. Maybe they're not as vulnerable as they thought. The criticism is an attempt to protect themselves from their own feelings by devaluing what they've been valuing. It's psychological defense mechanism that allows them to feel less attached by focusing on negatives rather than positives. The third defensive strategy is creating arbitrary new rules or boundaries that reduce intimacy and contact. The avoidant person who has been seeing you regularly suddenly needs more space between dates. The person who has been texting daily suddenly decides that much communication is unhealthy and they need to reduce contact. The person who has been staying over regularly suddenly needs to maintain more independence by always sleeping in their own space. These new boundaries are framed as healthy self-care or as necessary for maintaining their autonomy, but they function to reduce the intimacy that has been building and that has led to feelings the avoidant person cannot tolerate. These new boundaries often feel arbitrary and confusing because they contradict the pattern that has been established and that seemed to be working well. You've been seeing each other 3 times a week for months and everything has been good, but suddenly they announce they can only do once a week because they need more alone time. The timing of these boundary changes, coming right after a period of increased closeness, reveals their true function. They're emergency measures designed to create the distance the avoidant person suddenly desperately needs. The fourth defensive strategy involves the avoidant person creating or emphasizing external reasons why the relationship can't work. They might suddenly start talking about how their career is going to require them to move or travel extensively. They might emphasize differences in your long-term goals or values that they previously treated as unimportant. They might bring up logistical challenges or practical obstacles that make the relationship difficult. These external factors provide convenient explanation for ending or downgrading the relationship that doesn't require the avoidant person to acknowledge their internal fear. This externalization of problems is particularly effective defense because it shifts blame away from the avoidant person's emotional limitations and onto circumstances beyond anyone's control. It's not that they're afraid of intimacy or running from their feelings. It's that the timing is wrong, or the circumstances aren't right, or there are practical reasons why things can't work. This framing protects their ego and their self-image while achieving their goal of creating the exit they need. The fifth defensive strategy is picking fights or creating conflict that didn't exist before. The avoidant person, who has been generally easygoing and agreeable, suddenly becomes difficult and contentious. They pick fights over small things. They interpret neutral behaviors as slights or problems. They create drama where none existed. This conflict creation serves multiple functions. It makes the relationship less pleasant and therefore easier to leave. It creates justification for ending things by making the relationship seem dysfunctional, and it triggers your reactive behaviors that the avoidant person can then point to as evidence that you're the problem. The conflict creation also serves to push you away so that the ending feels more mutual or even like your choice rather than theirs. If they can make you angry enough, if they can trigger enough of your anxious behaviors, if they can create enough dysfunction, you might end things yourself, which would relieve them of responsibility for the ending and protect them from feeling like they're abandoning you. This is particularly appealing outcome for the avoidant person because it allows them to frame themselves as victim of the ending rather than as architect of it. How they sabotage while appearing normal. After the initial defensive strategies create some distance, the avoidant person enters more sophisticated phase of sabotage, where they systematically dismantle the relationship while maintaining appearance of normalcy. This phase is particularly confusing and painful because the avoidant person continues showing up in some ways while withdrawing in others, creating mixed signals that keep you hoping while they're actually implementing their exit plan. The sabotage during this phase is subtle enough that you might not recognize it as intentional dismantling until the relationship has already collapsed. The first form of subtle sabotage is inconsistency in effort and investment. The avoidant person alternates between showing up and checking out in ways that keep you off balance and confused. One week, they seem present and engaged, planning dates and initiating contact. The next week, they're distant and unavailable, offering minimal effort and communication. This inconsistency prevents you from adjusting to new baseline in the relationship because there is no baseline. The pattern keeps changing, which keeps you focused on trying to understand and manage the inconsistency rather than recognizing that the inconsistency itself is the sabotage. This alternating pattern also serves to slowly reduce your expectations and tolerance over time. Each time they pull back and you adjust to less contact or investment. When they return to higher level of engagement, it feels like improvement, even though it might still be less than what was normal earlier in the relationship. They're gradually training you to accept less while maintaining hope that things will return to how they were. This hope prevents you from recognizing that the trajectory is actually downward, that they're slowly but systematically withdrawing their presence and investment. The second form of sabotage is strategic unavailability. The avoidant person becomes increasingly busy with work, friends, hobbies, anything that provides legitimate excuse for not being available to you. They're not disappearing entirely, which would be obvious abandonment, but they're filling their schedule so full that time for the relationship becomes scarce and squeezed into smaller and smaller windows. This strategic busyness allows them to reduce contact and intimacy while framing it as unfortunate circumstance rather than as choice they're making. The unavailability is strategic rather than genuine because the avoidant person is often making choices that prioritize other things over the relationship when they could choose differently. They commit to projects they could decline. They make plans with friends during times they used to reserve for you. They fill their schedule deliberately, whether consciously or unconsciously, to create the distance they need while maintaining an excuse that doesn't reveal their actual motivation. If you express concern about the reduced time together, they can point to all their obligations and frame your concern as not understanding how busy they are, rather than acknowledging they're choosing to be this busy as a way to avoid intimacy. The third form of sabotage involves the avoidant person withdrawing their emotional presence even during times when they're physically present. They're with you, but they're not really there. They're distracted, checking their phone, seeming preoccupied with other things. The quality of time together deteriorates even as they maintain some quantity of contact. This allows them to say they're still showing up, they're still seeing you, but the actual intimacy and connection that makes time together meaningful has been withdrawn. They're going through motions without genuine presence. This emotional absence during physical presence is particularly damaging because it creates loneliness within the relationship that can be more painful than being alone. You're sitting across from someone you love, but they're not engaging with you meaningfully. You're together, but you're not connected. This experience is confusing and destabilizing because the problem isn't visible or easy to articulate. They're right there. So why do you feel so alone? The avoidant person's withdrawal of emotional presence while maintaining physical presence is sophisticated sabotage because it's difficult to identify and address directly. The fourth form of sabotage is the avoidant person's increasing comfort with letting conflicts and issues go unresolved. Earlier in the relationship, they might have made at least minimal effort to address problems or repair after conflicts. But during the sabotage phase, they let things fester. They don't follow up after arguments. They don't work to resolve issues. They allow distance created by conflict to remain rather than working to repair and reconnect. This pattern of unresolved conflict accumulates over time, creating growing rift that makes the eventual ending seem inevitable rather than like abandonment. The avoidant person's comfort with unresolved conflict reveals that they're no longer invested in the relationship's health and longevity. Someone who wants the relationship to work makes effort to repair and resolve. Someone who is planning their exit allows problems to accumulate because those accumulated problems provide justification for leaving and make the relationship less pleasant to remain in. The lack of repair effort is itself a form of sabotage that accelerates the relationship's deterioration. The fifth form of sabotage involves the avoidant person gradually removing themselves from your life in ways that prepare for their eventual, complete exit. They stop making plans far in advance, keeping everything short-term and tentative. They become less integrated into your social world and stop including you in theirs. They remove visible signs of the relationship from their space or social media. They start talking about future plans in individual rather than couple terms. All of these small withdrawals are preparing for the larger withdrawal of ending the relationship entirely. They're slowly untangling themselves so that the final exit requires less rupture and causes them less pain. This gradual removal is particularly insidious because each individual instance seems small and potentially insignificant. They don't want to make plans for next month because they're not sure about their schedule. They'd rather not go to your friend's event because they're tired. They removed a photo from social media because they were cleaning up their profile. Each explanation sounds reasonable in isolation, but the pattern of these small withdrawals reveals the larger process of exit preparation. The avoidant person is systematically reducing their investment and presence in your life, creating conditions where the final ending will be less disruptive to them because they've already withdrawn so much. The slow or sudden exit they've been architecting, the final phase of the avoidant person's process, is the actual exit, the ending they've been architecting since the day they recognized their feelings for you. This exit can take two distinct forms, depending on the avoidant person's style and circumstances. It can be slow fade, where they gradually withdraw until the relationship dissolves into nothing, or it can be sudden abandonment, where they abruptly end things with minimal warning. Both forms are painful, but they're painful in different ways and reveal different aspects of how avoidant people handle the endings they've created. The slow fade is the avoidant person's preferred exit strategy when possible, because it allows them to avoid the confrontation and definitiveness of actual breakup conversation. In the slow fade, they simply continue the sabotage and withdrawal until there's almost nothing left of the relationship. Contact becomes increasingly sparse. Time together becomes increasingly rare. Emotional connection becomes non-existent. The relationship essentially dies from neglect, and at some point, either you finally end it out of exhaustion and frustration, or it just kind of peters out without formal ending at all. The slow fade serves multiple purposes for the avoidant person. It allows them to avoid taking explicit responsibility for ending the relationship. They never actually broke up with you. Things just didn't work out. This framing protects their ego and self-image by preventing them from seeing themselves as someone who abandons people. It also minimizes their own pain, because the ending happens gradually rather than all at once. They've been withdrawing incrementally for weeks or months, so by the time the relationship officially ends, they've already processed much of the loss and created significant emotional distance. The slow fade also keeps you as option for as long as possible. Throughout the fade, the relationship still technically exists, even though it's barely functioning. This means the avoidant person can return to higher level of engagement if they decide they want to, if their other options don't work out, if they have moment of missing you or doubting their exit plan. The ambiguity of the slow fade prevents clean break and keeps the door open for the avoidant person to walk back through if they choose, while giving them all the benefits of being essentially single and unattached. For you, the slow fade is torture because you're left constantly trying to understand what's happening and whether there's anything you can do to save the relationship. The lack of clear ending makes it difficult to grieve and move forward. You're stuck in limbo, hoping the person will come back around, trying to figure out what changed and how to fix it. The avoidant person's refusal to end things clearly traps you in this ambiguous space that prevents healing and keeps you emotionally invested in relationship that is already over. In every meaningful sense, the sudden abandonment is the exit strategy avoidant people employ when slow fade isn't working, or when they reach a point where their discomfort with the relationship becomes so acute that they need immediate escape. In sudden abandonment, the avoidant person ends things abruptly, often with minimal explanation, and sometimes even by completely disappearing without formal ending conversation. This exit strategy is more traumatic for you, but often more necessary for the avoidant person when their anxiety has reached unbearable levels. The sudden abandonment typically follows one of two patterns. In the first pattern, the avoidant person picks moment to have breakup conversation where they announce they're ending things. This conversation often feels like it comes out of nowhere to you, because you didn't realize things were as bad as the avoidant person is claiming. They might cite incompatibilities or problems that seem exaggerated or newly invented. They're often remarkably calm and decided during this conversation, which creates disturbing contrast with your shock and devastation. This calmness reveals that they've been planning this ending for a while, processing it internally without including you, and have reached point of resolution before ever talking to you about it. In the second pattern of sudden abandonment, the avoidant person simply ghosts or creates some incident that gives them excuse to end things without conversation. They might pick fight over something trivial and use your response as justification for immediately ending things. They might just stop responding to your messages and calls, disappearing without explanation. They might announce via text or other distanced communication that they're done. This pattern is employed when the avoidant person cannot tolerate the discomfort of actual ending conversation and needs to escape without the vulnerability that face-to-face ending would require. The sudden abandonment serves different purposes than the slow fade. It provides immediate relief from the anxiety the avoidant person has been experiencing. They're out, they've escaped, the source of their vulnerability is removed from their life. This immediate relief is what they need when their discomfort has become intolerable. The sudden abandonment also prevents you from having opportunity to talk them out of their decision or to create more intimacy that would make leaving harder. By ending things decisively and quickly, they protect themselves from their own potential wavering or from your influence pulling them back in. For you, sudden abandonment is devastating in a different way than slow fade. The shock of abrupt ending, the lack of adequate explanation, the inability to have closure conversation if they ghost, all of these create trauma that makes healing more difficult. You're left with hundreds of unanswered questions about what happened and why. The avoidant person's refusal to provide adequate explanation or to engage with the ending in a meaningful way prevents you from processing and understanding the loss. You're left searching for answers that the avoidant person will likely never provide. Regardless of whether the exit is slow fade or sudden abandonment, the ending has several consistent features across most avoidant exits. First, the avoidant person typically remains remarkably detached and unemotional about the ending, at least outwardly. They've been processing the loss throughout their withdrawal, so by the time the actual ending arrives, they've already done much of their grieving. They appear to move on quickly, which can be devastating to witness. Their apparent lack of feeling about the relationship's end makes you question whether they ever cared at all, though the truth is, they cared too much, and that's why they had to leave. Second, the avoidant person rarely provides the kind of honest explanation that would help you understand what happened. They don't say, "I fell in love with you, and it terrified me, so I sabotaged the relationship to escape my own vulnerability." They provide surface explanations about incompatibility or timing or external circumstances that obscure the real reason for their exit. This dishonesty protects them from having to acknowledge their patterns and limitations, but it leaves you confused and unable to achieve the kind of understanding that facilitates healing. Third, the avoidant person often expresses some desire to remain friends or to stay in contact, though this desire is rarely genuine desire for friendship. It's continuation of their pattern of wanting to keep you as option, maintaining connection that allows them to know you're still there in case they change their mind or need validation that they still matter to you. This offer of friendship is final manipulation that serves them while preventing your complete healing and forward movement. The day the avoidant person realized they loved you was the day they began planning their exit. Everything that followed, all the defensive strategies, all the sabotage, all the withdrawal, was implementation of that exit plan. Understanding this timeline, recognizing that their retreat began not despite their feelings, but because of their feelings, is essential for your healing. It allows you to stop blaming yourself for the relationship's failure and to recognize that the problem was never about you being too much or not enough. The problem was that you became important to someone who cannot tolerate importance, that you mattered to someone who has organized their life around not letting anyone matter that much. The ending was inevitable from the moment they recognized their love for you, not because of anything you did wrong, but because of wounds and defenses they carry that prevent them from accepting and building on love rather than running from it.